Hello and welcome back. This is the week 15 lecture. So this is the final lecture of the semester. We're pretty much done with all of our films at this point, so I really just wanted to talk about the final paper today. Go over a few tips, a few last minute suggestions, because I assume at this point we are ready to be drafting. We are ready to be working on our rough drafts. Hopefully that's what we're doing here at the beginning of week 15. If you take a look at the week 15 module, you'll see that the rough drafts are due on Wednesday of this week. So May 14th. That's a little bit different than our usual routine. Throughout the semester, everything's been due at the end of weeks, but with limited time now, I decided to go ahead and make a Wednesday due date for the rough draft, and then we have an additional week after those rough drafts are due. We have an additional week before the final drafts are due. The due date for the final drafts will be May 21st. So that is the Wednesday of exam week. So we have that layover because I want us to have time to revise and edit our rough drafts. So once you submit the rough draft by Wednesday of this week, I'll be able to provide feedback by the weekend. I'll tell you what's working, what's not working, the improvements that you need to make, and then you'll have several days to implement those improvements before submitting the final draft. So we should have plenty of time to tackle these final papers. I've tried to meet with everybody. Most of us have already had our conferences. A few of us might be having them early this week, but we should be ready to get moving on rough drafts. So with that in mind, I wanted to talk a little bit about a few things that we should be looking for, a few things that we should be doing as we write, as we put together the rough draft. So let's just start with what the paper is. So if you look at the instructions, this is a very similar paper to the midterm essay. It's the same basic purpose. We are trying to interpret a movie of our choice, one of the movies that we've watched, obviously. So the midterm essay covered everything through the first 8 weeks of the semester. So now we are tackling the second half. That means any movie from week 9 all the way through the end is fair game. So we are trying to interpret our chosen film. What does it mean? What is it saying? And how does it express that meaning? So we're doing more than just plot summary. We're doing more than just sort of rehearsing the familiar themes and the familiar plot summaries of these movies. We need to push beyond that stuff. We can use some of that stuff, but ultimately we want to arrive at an original interpretation or argument of our own. So this is the same thing that we did in our midterm essay, but we should be a little bit more comfortable with the work now because we've done it before. We've had some practice, and now we're doing it again. So let's try to improve upon that midterm essay, but also whatever was working well for us on the midterm, let's replicate it. But if we find some areas where we were struggling, some areas where we could have done better, we have a chance now to improve. So let's just walk through a few basic steps that you need to be following early this week if you haven't done some of this already. So obviously you want to start by reading the assignment instructions in Canvas and then picking your movie. Okay, so going back to week 9, when the second half of the semester started, take a look at all the movies that we've watched since then. So that basically means everything since Bullet, everything we've watched since Bullet in week 9. That includes all of the different animated shorts that I posted in week 12, and that can even include Moonlight, which was the final film we watched in week 14, even though we did not have a lecture on it because we were conferencing that week. So take your pick, but put some thought into your decision. Sometimes I think we might choose movies based on what we think will be easiest to write about, or the movie that we're most familiar with already. So maybe we feel like, okay, I'm comfortable with it. I know the story. I know I can find info about it potentially online. But those aren't really great reasons. You should really pick a movie based on your own interest level. You should really pick something that grabbed you, that interested you, that just struck you as a good, profound, or important film. The reasons that you're drawn to it don't matter so much. I mean, it could be any number of reasons. It might have had to do with visuals. It might have had to do with the story. You might have really connected with a particular character. You might have just really liked the music or some other very specific element at work. It's fine. But it needs to be genuine interest that drives you. Not just, oh yeah, everybody knows this movie, so it's easy to write about it, or, this is one that I think other people are going to write about, so I'll write about it too. If anything, we are striving for some individuality here, some originality. So if you feel like there's a movie, maybe you enjoyed it, but you kind of feel like you don't have a lot to say about it that's original, like maybe you enjoyed it, in kind of a general way, but you don't really feel like you can make an original argument. You don't really feel like you're going to be able to cook up an interpretation that's different maybe from other people's. That's actually a good reason to move away from that particular film. You might have liked it, you might have thought it was good, but ask yourself, do I have something to say about it beyond just the obvious, beyond what other people have already said? Do I have some really strong opinions that I can express? Or am I maybe looking at it from a slightly different angle or perspective? Or has the movie sparked an interest in you? Has it made you want to explore something more? Maybe you want to learn about something more. Any of that would be promising. Those are all good reasons to pick a film, but don't pick one just because you think it's easy. And once you've made your selection, make sure that you have access to the film. So I've tried to provide as many free links as possible in Canvas. Excuse me, I need to take a sip of water. Got something in my throat. So obviously take advantage of the free links. You can go back and reuse those. But also, if you've purchased any of these movies and you own them now, that's great. But that should factor into your decision. When you pick the movie that you want to write about, make sure you can go back and watch it again. At least you want to be able to go back and watch parts of it again. I know we might be pressed for time. We might not be able to rewatch the film in its entirety, but you want to go back and at least rewatch parts of it. That's just going to be important for you as you're writing, because we want to get specific in these papers. Again, I'm not looking for plot summaries. I'm not looking for general overviews about the movie. I really don't care that much about the biographies of the director and the screenwriter and the cinematographer. Unless you're going to talk about cinematography, I don't need to know when the cinematographer was born and who he was married to and the other movies that he worked on. I probably don't even need to know a lot of that if you are talking about cinematography, but definitely the bio stuff is not important if you're not going to be exploring the element that it's connected to. Again, you don't need to talk about that stuff with the cinematographer unless one of the elements you're going to write about in the paper is cinematography. So cut out the bios, cut out most of the plot summary. We don't need any of that, okay? What you're really doing is analyzing. So I want you guys to think about that word and what it means, and I want us to contrast the word to a word like summarizing. We can all summarize. That's a skill most college writers already possess. You generally pick it up at the lower levels of school. So a little bit of summary can help sometimes if you're setting the stage for an original point or claim of your own. You might want to tell us briefly sort of what's happening at that point in the movie. But ask yourself, if you are summarizing, ask yourself, is this summary helping me to analyze? And when you analyze, what that means is you're searching for meaning. You're trying to figure out how something works and what it means. All right, so we are very much analyzing these movies. We're trying to figure out the larger meaning of the movie. So yes, that means sort of identifying theme, right? We can think of it that way. But also, we're trying to explain how that meaning gets expressed in the film. So that's analysis. You're digging deeper with analysis. You're going beyond the surface. You're going beyond summary. And you're really getting at the underlying meaning and how that meaning gets communicated to the audience. So that requires more than just telling me the bio of the director and then giving me a plot summary. See, a summary is really not analysis at all. They're very different. Now, summary can set up analysis. Summary can set the stage for some analysis, but you can't have summary only. All right, that's not going to get it done. So it's important to be able to go back to the film that you chose and try to pick out some specific scenes or individual moments in the film. We've talked a little bit throughout the semester about identifying scenes or sequences. So scenes are kind of like self-contained little episodes or narratives within the larger movie. So you can usually identify a scene based on location and action and the characters who are present. So normally a scene is kind of self-contained. So it will take place in like one location over the course of, maybe a few minutes in the film. It might be slightly longer in the film universe, but as far as how much time we as audience members spend, it's going to be maybe a few minutes long. There'll be sort of the same group of characters present, and they're usually completing some coherent action, right? And then we have a cut to the next scene, and maybe we're in a different place with different people, and something different is happening, right? So it's not an exact science identifying scenes, but we can normally do it. And then longer than a scene is a sequence. And a sequence will take a bigger chunk of the movie's running time, and we might be moving around a little bit more. There might be several scenes contained within a sequence. But again, there's like continuity and coherence within that sequence. Like everything that's happening kind of makes sense. It works together. Again, this might be like a 10 to 15 minute segment of the movie, and then we cut and we move to something else. So you can always identify some of these individual scenes or sequences and then talk about them in your paper. And it's good to do that because, again, you want to be specific. We're not just talking about what happens in the movie overall, generally. We want to get specific about particular moments or scenes because that will give us a better chance to talk about specific elements. And just like I say in the instructions, you really need to tackle different elements of the movie. And you have a lot to choose from. So we've talked about narrative elements and also technical elements. So narrative elements really just refer to all the stuff that we would use to analyze literature. Novels, short stories, or other pieces of writing. So we can think about theme, right? Larger meaning or message. We can think about plot, sure, to some extent. But more interesting often will be characters, setting, even dialogue. You could think about how characters talk or what characters say to one another. All of that would be fair game. Also symbolism, figurative language. Some of that stuff doesn't translate over to movies as much, but symbolism definitely does. Characters do. Plot does. Theme does. And settings. You can always talk about those. So those are narrative elements that would show up in writing, and they also show up in movies. So we can always work with those. But then there's also the technical elements that are unique to movies. So we've talked about a lot of these throughout the semester as well. We're talking about cinematography. That means camera work. So individual camera shots, and also maybe how the camera moves in certain instances. All of that would be fair game. We've talked about lighting. We've talked about editing. We've talked about music. We've talked about set design, or sort of production design more generally. So that would refer to kind of everything that we see on screen outside of camera work. So within production design, you could talk about sets, you could talk about costumes, you could talk about hair, makeup, anything that contributes to visuals. But we've also talked about sound, we've talked about music, we've talked about special effects, and we've talked about specific job titles within movie making teams, right? So we know that the director is normally in charge of a movie production, and they're sort of the creative chief. So everybody sort of answers to them. That's why we give credit to the director. We say these movies kind of belong to the directors. But we've also talked about cinematographers, editors, special effects coordinators, actors. We can obviously talk about characters, performances, the actors who are performing. All of that is available to you. So what you need to do as you choose your movie and then maybe go back to rewatch parts of it, really pick out the elements that jump out to you. Pick out anything that strikes you as important. And again, this can go back to your initial reason for liking the movie in the first place. Oh, I really like the characters in this movie. Okay, that's going to be one of your elements then. We can talk about characters. We can talk about multiple characters. What else? Are you struck by the camera work? Do you like the soundtrack? Do you think the use of lighting and shadows is very interesting? That could especially be true for, older movies. By this point, second half of the class, I think everything should have been in color, but there's still interesting stuff happening with light. So maybe that grabs you. If it's Close Encounters or some of the more recent movies like Last Action Hero, maybe special effects. Those might grab you. But just, it doesn't matter as long as it's authentic, as long as it's coming from you. You say, I like that. I'm struck by that element. Write it down. That's going to be something that you can talk about in your paper, which means you can build body paragraphs around that particular element. You can have a paragraph about characters. You can have multiple paragraphs about characters. You can have paragraphs about the cinematography, talking about specific camera shots, whatever you want. But it's time to get specific and start writing things down. So before we start writing the rough draft, as always, it's good to take notes and outline. Put together at least an informal rough plan for your paper, and then you can follow that plan as you start drafting. So jot down a few notes. Again, if you don't have time to rewatch the whole movie, go back and watch parts of it. Try to pick out at least a couple of different scenes or sequences that you can discuss in more detail in the paper. So maybe those scenes include important character development or some really cool camera work. Then you need to revisit those, talk about those more, maybe even write down the point of the movie where the scene begins, like maybe the 14-minute mark, and then the scene ends at the 18-and-a-half-minute mark. You could write that down just so you can return to that scene later if you want, without having to watch, everything else. So take some notes. Do a little bit of outlining, but really focus on the elements that you want to explore, both narrative elements and technical. For this paper, I would really like everybody to do both, to try to take at least one narrative element and at least one technical element. Let's do both. Let's do some of the more traditional sort of literary analysis that we're comfortable with, because we've all taken English classes before where we had to analyze a novel or a short story. So let's use some of those skills that we already have, but let's add the technical elements to our tool belt so we can tackle some of those, because they are unique to cinema, to movies. So write down the elements that you want and try to find some particular moments or scenes where those elements are very much at work. That's the stuff you'll be able to talk about and analyze in your papers. And again, just my final reminder is come up with an original interpretation of your own. So think of this as your argument. Think of this as an argumentative paper, much like some of those that you've written in English classes before. You are making an argument. The argument is based on what you think the movie means and how you think the movie is expressing that meaning. So again, with some of these themes, they're kind of universal, they're kind of well known, so you don't really have to explain it all that much. A good example, going back to the midterm essay, was The Wizard of Oz. A lot of us wrote about The Wizard of Oz, which is fine. It's a popular movie, a beloved movie to this day. But it's a movie that everybody kind of knows the meaning of, right? Even if we haven't watched it. The theme of that film has been identified, talked about, analyzed, discussed for so long that there's really not a ton that we can add to a discussion of that movie's larger meaning or theme. We pretty much all know it. That doesn't mean you can't do something fun and interesting and original with that movie, but you have to personalize it. Not enough of us maybe did that with the midterm. Sometimes we just sort of rested with the commonly accepted interpretation that already existed and has existed for a long time, and maybe we just repeated it, and that's not bad, but we can add more to it. Okay, so yeah, maybe the theme is obvious, maybe the theme is well known, but what does it mean to us? What kind of experience or effect did it create for us? And more specifically, how does that meaning come through? How does it get communicated? And that's, again, where your elements come in. Because usually that's how we can tie all of this together. The characters, the camera work, the music, the special effects, whatever we're looking at, they should all be contributing to the meaning of the film, the meaning that you're identifying. So that's how to make all of your observations, all of your ideas connect and work together to make something larger, okay, to do something a little bit bigger. So remember to personalize your interpretation. Tell us what it means to you. I don't necessarily want to know or need to know what it means to everybody else, to all the previous film critics and scholars and reviewers. We want a personal, original response. And I know that can be daunting sometimes because we think, well, I'm not an expert, right? All of these other people have written about the movie. What can I add to what they've already said? Well, the answer is you can only add your own opinions, your own viewpoints, your own experience, your own observations, your own ideas. If you're not being original, yeah, you will find that there's nothing to add. Right? But if you are being original and you're talking about your own viewing experience and your own understanding, then you can't help but be original. What you're saying might be similar to what other people have said, but nobody has had the exact same viewing experience as you did. Right? You are a unique individual. Nobody else thinks exactly about this movie the way you do. So by sticking with your original ideas and building them, expanding upon them, you can't help but express an original interpretation. That's the goal. Okay, so I don't mind you guys using some outside sources to help you with background info. If you do need some biographical stuff, you know where to find that. There's plenty of info about all of these movies available online. But I really only want you to use sources for informative stuff, like telling us more about a special effect, like how they did it, telling us more about a particular camera shot. Why did the cinematographer want to do it that way? Maybe comparing that shot to other shots or other works from that cinematographer. Like, you can use some sources to help you with stuff like that. But when it comes to interpreting, when it comes to making your original argument, I don't want you to use sources. I want all of that to really come from you. And the final thing that I sort of wanted to talk about today is just the difference between two things. The difference between what it means versus what happened. Okay, so we're on the level of what it means. That's where I want you guys to be. That's analysis. What does the movie mean, and how does it express that meaning? That's the level of analysis. The other level, what happened, that's the level of plot summary. Okay? And again, plot summary is not always bad, but it's bad if that's all you're doing. Okay? So you can do some of it. But our primary goal here is not to simply tell readers what happened in the movie. You can assume that your readers already know. You can assume that your readers have probably seen the movie, so they don't need an extensive plot summary. We remember what happened. And if we have questions, we can go back and rewatch ourselves. We don't need a play-by-play plot summary that covers all the key events of the movie. We just don't want it. All right? So if you can get out of the plot summary mode, get out of just talking about what happened, and get into analysis mode. Not just what happened, but what it means, why it's important, and again, be creative. Make some real-world connections. If you think there's an important theme or an important idea at work in the movie, talk about it. Why is it important? Why does it affect viewers the way that it does? You can also make some other comparisons, some connections with other movies that you've watched. We like to do that. So if one of these movies sort of reminded you of another film that you've seen, that you enjoy, that you saw on your own, make the connection. Maybe that's important. Maybe that has relevance, and you can sort of tease that out a little bit in the paper. So make it your own. Have fun with it. There's really no right or wrong when it comes to interpretation. As long as you can support your interpretation, it's valid. We'll hear you out, even if we don't end up necessarily agreeing. We being your readers. But just remember, when it comes to a paper like this, the evidence for your interpretation will largely come from the examples that you're discussing from the film. So if you want to make points about cinematography or editing or music, again, you have to take us to specific moments in the film when those elements are at work. And you need to show us what those elements are doing, what they mean, the larger significance, all of that. That's really going to be your evidence, is picking out those specific examples. Here's character development. Here's an important commentary on the setting. Here's the camera work that I'm talking about. Take us to those moments. Use your observations from those moments as evidence to support your larger ideas. That's how we sort of build these interpretations and turn them into credible arguments. So that's what we're doing. Again, focus on what the film means. So you can think about that as theme. You can think about that as a larger message. But sometimes you might just think of it as like a feeling. Maybe the film wants us to feel a certain way. Maybe it's about capturing a certain emotion or a certain time in life. it's not always intellectual, right? You might not always think about it strictly as an idea or a message. It might be a feeling, and that's fine. You can get a lot of mileage out of feelings and vibes. A lot of movies are very much trying to create those. So what's that meaning that you want to latch onto? And then the next level is, how does the film express that meaning? And again, use your elements to show us how the meaning comes through and how we understand it as viewers. All right? So take a look at my feedback. Once I've seen your rough drafts, I will give you much more sort of detailed feedback, telling you exactly what you need to do before submitting the final draft. So using my feedback and maybe the help of other trusted advisors, you're going to turn the rough draft that we write this week into the final draft that's due at the very end. So I do encourage you guys to leave yourself some time to revise and edit your drafts. Again, using my feedback, using what you notice yourself as you read back through your rough draft, and using whatever additional help you can find. We have plenty of time, but if you need more time, or if you have questions, if you're having struggles, just email me. We can still talk more. I know I'm going to conference with a few of you at the beginning of week 15. If you still haven't scheduled a conference, you might want to reach out. It will be too late at some point, but here early in the week, I can probably accommodate you. But even if we've already conferenced once, we can do another Zoom call if you have more questions, or you can just email me. I'm available. Let's talk. Give this paper some time and try to have some fun with it. That's usually how things work best. So get in touch if you need anything. Otherwise, I've had a fun semester. I hope you guys have too. I hope you've been able to explore movies maybe in a way that you haven't before. Perhaps you found a few films that you really enjoyed, or maybe some eras or genres that you want to explore more. So happy watching. Keep watching, and let me know if you need anything. Bye.